France isn't collapsing in flames. It's fading, quietly, invisibly, almost beautifully. The cafes are still full. The streets still glow under golden light. But something underneath is breaking. This isn't a crisis you can hear. There are no alarms, no chaos, no headlines screaming collapse. Instead, it's a slow hollowing, a system losing its core while the surface remains intact. And that's what makes it dangerous. France isn't being destroyed by failure. It's being weakened by its own success. A success so powerful, it replaced everything else. Tourism still pours billions into the country every year. It looks strong on paper. It looks unstoppable from the outside. But the numbers are starting to shift in ways few are paying attention to. Since the global travel boom stabilized after 2024, something changed. Travelers are spending less, staying shorter, choosing cheaper. Inflation didn't just hit locals. It reshaped tourism itself. And when spending drops, the illusion begins to crack. Because France didn't just build a tourism sector. It built entire regions that depend on it to survive. On the surface, everything still looks the same. The lights, the architecture, the romance people travel for. It's all still there. But beneath that beauty, the reality is shifting fast. Housing is becoming unreachable for locals. Entire neighborhoods are losing permanent residents. Inequality is widening quietly in the background. Wealth concentrates in tourist zones, while locals are pushed further out. The city shines, but fewer people truly live inside it. And this is where the real problem begins. Because when an economy leans too heavily on one thing, it stops being strong. It becomes fragile. Entire local industries have slowly disappeared, replaced by restaurants, hotels, souvenir shops, everything optimized for visitors, not residents. It works, as long as tourists keep coming, as long as they keep spending, as long as the flow never slows down. But what happens when that changes? What happens when millions still visit, but spend less, stay less, and move faster? What happens when volume remains, but value disappears? That's the tension building right now. Not a sudden crash, but a slow imbalance. A system stretched too far in one direction. France is not facing the end of tourism. It's facing the consequences of relying on it too much. And those consequences don't arrive loudly. They settle in quietly. Because this is no longer a boom. It's no longer pure growth. It's something far more unstable. This is what a dependency looks like. Not when it fails, but when it starts to weaken. And no one notices in time. The most visited city in the world is not overflowing. It's not bursting at the seams. It's quietly becoming unlivable. From a distance, everything feels alive. Crowds gather near monuments, cameras flash, streets feel full. But look closer, and something feels off. Because the people you see are not the people who live here. They are passing through, staying briefly, leaving quickly. In the heart of Paris, homes are no longer homes. They've become assets, short-term rentals, temporary stays. Platforms like Airbnb have transformed entire districts. Apartments once filled with families are now optimized for visitors. Every space redesigned for turnover, not belonging. And as this shift accelerates, locals are pushed out. Rents climb beyond reach. Ownership becomes impossible for the average resident. What replaces them is not community, it's rotation. A constant cycle of strangers. This is where the city begins to change. Not visually at first, but structurally. The soul starts to thin out. Shops that once served daily life begin to disappear. Local bakeries, pharmacies, grocery stores, replaced by cafes, souvenir shops, and check-in points. Everything becomes transactional. Everything becomes temporary. Nothing is built to last. And then comes the silence. Because when the tourists return to their rooms, there is no neighborhood left behind, no children playing, no neighbors talking, no sense of belonging. This is urban desertification, a city center that looks alive during the day and feels abandoned at night. But the deeper risk is economic, because this entire system depends on one thing: continuous tourism demand. If that demand slows, even slightly, thousands of these apartments lose purpose instantly. They sit empty, unused, unprofitable. And when empty spaces increase, property values begin to shift. What once seemed like a safe investment becomes unstable. But the damage isn't just economic, it's social, it's human. With fewer permanent residents, public services begin to decline. Schools close, clinics reduce hours, infrastructure weakens, security starts to fade as well. Because a city without community has no one watching over it. Paris begins to feel different, not dangerous, but disconnected. And this is the quiet transformation, not into ruin, but into something far more unsettling. A city that still looks perfect, still attracts millions, still shines on postcards. But underneath, it no longer functions as a living city. It becomes something else entirely. Paris risks becoming a museum, not of history, but of itself. Across France, the pattern repeats. Different places, different stories, but the same quiet outcome. Tourism brought growth. It created jobs, filled streets, built entire economies, but it also created dependence. And now, That dependence is starting to show its cracks, not all at once, but region by region. In Lourdes, faith once powered everything. Pilgrims filled the streets. Hotels thrived year-round. The city lived through devotion and constant flow. But today, many hotels stand closed. Energy costs have surged. Debts remain unpaid. Small businesses can no longer survive the pressure. Without pilgrims, the system stalls. There is no backup economy, only silence where crowds once stood. In Saint-Tropez, wealth is everywhere. Luxury yachts, designer stores, multi-million villas, a picture of perfection. But behind that image, workers struggle. Many can't afford to live where they work. They are pushed further and further away. And when summer ends, everything stops. The town empties. A seasonal ghost remains. At Mont-Saint-Michel, millions arrive every year. But they don't stay. They pass through. A few hours, photos, souvenirs. Then they leave, leaving little behind. Culture becomes surface level. History becomes a backdrop. The place survives, but doesn't live. In Carcassonne, the walls still stand strong. Tourists come to admire them. But outside those walls, reality is different. Spending is low. Local income remains weak. Businesses survive, but barely. It's a strange contrast. A beautiful place, struggling underneath, a postcard hiding poverty. And in Chamonix, nature itself is shifting. Snow seasons are becoming shorter. Glaciers are retreating. To keep tourism alive, costs are rising. Artificial snow, expensive infrastructure, a system fighting against reality. But if nature changes too much, the entire model collapses. Because the attraction itself disappears. Different regions, different stories, but the same truth emerges. These economies were built for visitors, not for resilience, not for long-term stability. And when visitors become unpredictable, everything becomes uncertain. Everything becomes fragile. Because in the end, these are not independent economies. They are systems built on movement. And when that movement slows, what remains is not growth. It's exposure. This isn't just about tourism anymore. It's something deeper, a system beginning to question itself. Because France is not facing a tourism problem. It's facing a structural identity crisis, one that has been building for years. The real issue is concentration. Most of the tourism revenue flows into a small number of places, leaving entire regions dependent on outside demand. This creates imbalance. Some areas overflow with wealth, others struggle to survive without visitors, and when that demand becomes unstable, the entire system begins to shake. Because it was never designed for stability. New pressures are now accelerating the cracks. Climate change is reshaping the environment. Heat waves, floods, and disappearing snow are no longer distant threats. At the same time, costs are rising. Energy is more expensive. Travel itself is becoming less accessible. And across Europe, resistance is growing. Locals are pushing back against mass tourism. Protests are no longer rare. They're becoming a pattern. Even tourists themselves are changing. They stay shorter. They spend less. Which means the old model no longer works the same way. High volume no longer guarantees high value. And that shift is critical. But the deepest fracture is social, because this is no longer just economic. It's human. Locals feel pushed out. Communities feel replaced. Cities feel divided. Wealth grows in one corner. Survival becomes harder in another, and the gap continues to widen. So what happens next? There are only a few possible paths forward, and none of them are easy. One path is a controlled reset. Regulation, balance, sustainable tourism. A system redesigned to include locals again. Another path is slow decay, empty apartments, abandoned infrastructure. And the final path is sudden shock, an economic downturn that cuts the flow instantly, leaving entire regions exposed overnight. Because the truth is simple. France is not collapsing because people stopped coming. It's collapsing because it cannot function without them. And when a system depends entirely on outsiders, it stops being strong. It becomes fragile. So the real question is not about tourism, it's about survival. It's about identity. When the tourists disappear, even for a moment, what remains?